Good morning again. Thank you for joining us on Friday Focus on this, the 12th of June 2026. Now, we're past our 50th episode, and you know we celebrated that last time with Kai Vatcher on a great episode looking at the way that education is changing and how that's happening on the ground. So welcome back. Thank you for being here. You're probably listening on LinkedIn or YouTube. Know that you can find us on Spotify and Substack. We're growing audience on Substack, both the written text and the episodes of Friday Focus. And we've got some new things coming over the next few months as well. So please keep watching out and join us for those. Now, again, we're here joining the conversation about education and its processes. And I'm really pleased to welcome to the studio this morning Shaheen Myers. Thank you for joining us, Shaheen. It's really great to have you here. So the founder of Balance Ed, you've been an education leader for some time. I'm not going to tell everybody that bit. Let you tell your story. So your journey to this point. Tell us a bit about how you got to this point.
Journey to this point. Sometimes you think you haven't got enough time to really to explain journey. It's interesting because I always ask people during keynotes or coaching, what's your story of origin? And that question itself sparks this whole insight into the person beneath the titles and the roles, and you get to find out about their ambitions and their key defining moments in time. So it's such a brilliant question to ask. My journey started two halves really. I had my primary education down south in Reading, Berkshire, and a trajectory of probably good and high success. I passed my 11 plus, was going to go to Kendrick Girls' School and probably into law at that point, and I knew that quite early on. And we moved as a family back up north to Bradford, and my secondary schooling was completely different to my primary schooling. So my primary schooling was open, a sense of belonging. You were thrown into all sorts of activities and opportunities. You had a chance to develop yourself personally, and as well as stretching yourself and having that challenge. But I think the sense of belonging was really, really strong and acute. But at secondary school, it's very different. So I was academically quite bright. And I remember my first day at secondary school in Set 1 being marched out of Set 1 maths into Set 4 for no reason at all, just being marched out. And that started a long battle with the system itself in secondary, and not being seen and not feeling that what I'd had in primary could take me somewhere in secondary. And I was a young carer, and that wasn't noticed. So I had 30% attendance in secondary school and wasn't really able to develop a schema of knowledge or work with the curriculum to the point where I had that really good understanding to sit my exams in year 11. And I remember the day sitting my science exam and not being able to answer the questions. Not because I couldn't read, I could read incredibly well. I just couldn't answer them because I didn't have the knowledge really to answer it. And at that point, my feeling of frustration was incredibly high. So I tore my exam paper up and sat back in the chair. And on that day, I was permanently excluded from secondary school in year 11 with no qualification. And I think that marked really, for me, this sense of significant isolation, of not really understanding, one, my needs, and two, my academic ability to do incredibly well. And it just gave me the foresight and insight into how many people we lose, staff and children along the way, who for intentional reasons and non-intentional reasons we would create this division. And I find myself 25 years later with a career in education, supporting inclusion from the very start for children and for staff. So we can't do one or the other. I think is a two-prong approach. And I'd say my full circle moment would be the legacy of my role in Leeds when I became the first female Pakistani Deputy Director for Education in Leeds, and supporting the city with 0 permanent exclusions. And that's unheard of, really, for any local authority or any city. And I kind of that journey itself was from the lived experience of knowing what it's like not to. And I think if the culture had been right in the school, hence why I do the work that I do now, if it had been right in the first place, there wouldn't be missed opportunities and serious grave decisions made that make people feel they don't belong for a manner of different reasons. So, safeguarding aside, it just wasn't picked up on. So that's what my work has led me to in terms of the human side of school leadership.
Can I ask you, we've talked before. That's the first time I've heard you say that story, and it resonates so much with me and the work that we do within Smart Curriculum, because in a sense there's such systemic understanding and behavior and practices that are embedded. Because interestingly, hearing you, and I want to come to what you're doing now, because that's it's the product of that journey, and that's really important. But being in the directorate of an education provision, we can have all these grand ideas, but we're always fighting against the systemic understanding and behaviors and practices. In asking that question, I'm really interested to hear your kind of first point about moving into secondary is about setting and grouping and population design and the expectations of teachers around that. It's just what we do. It's the first communication around schooling, and your experience of that is just captured for me that why this work is so important. We've got to break the thinking around and the impact that thinking has. Such a bright, engaged, interested young lady at 11 stepping into another environment, and that's the first thing that you experience, and that's stayed with you. That to me, that's so impactful. That's so important for teachers and leaders and directors and everybody involved in the process to understand. That's why we do what we do, because this isn't acceptable, and it's not the right thing to be doing, is it? And it's had a good effect on you. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people it doesn't have a good effect on.
No, you're right. 20,000 under 6-year-olds were thousand young minds who have started their schooling journey and are forming their sense of identity and who they are, and are told inadvertently, you're not good enough, and you don't matter, because that's a message. No matter what we do, no matter how much we dress it up, and this is not about being anti-exclusion, because we've got to protect children and staff.
Absolutely. Yes.
But this is about what impact it has. And we know 98% of children who are permanently excluded will not achieve level 4 and above. And so we've got to take that statistic alone and say, we have got to think differently, because this is not just a maybe life chance. This is the life chance. Yeah. And I always say I'm an outlier. This is not a story of inspiration. It's not a story of motivation. This is I was an outlier to the system. Yeah. And therefore I will use that voice. Has it changed? No. I think we had, was it nearing 1 million suspensions? So it's not changing. Its trajectory is on the up, and there's a myriad of reasons behind that, and we're all working incredibly hard as a system to understand what that is.
Yeah.
I think when we look at changing an accountability system that paradoxically is measuring us against the standards that it doesn't want us to be able to achieve and do and be, that it's very, very difficult. It's a very difficult choice. So it's not there's no easy answers to this.
No,
but
no.
I think
I'm really interested in that's the place you went first in that journey. That the thing that kind of stands out to you is how you were positioned, what that meant to you as a person, how that set your values, and how you see yourself. Because I hear this so much where people set 1, set 4. It's almost that kind of, there's a value statement in it. I'd rather I was in that class and I was moved to that class. Yes. But we have this language that's kind of embedded in our system that has a value judgment against it, and we feel it. And you felt it because you come to that. You just illustrated for me so brilliantly some of the stuff that we've been talking about in that whole what it does to us. So sorry, that captured me really. Hearing you say it, because that's, I've been talking about it for years, and you just captured it so brilliantly. Let's get into so your life. You got to this sort of deputy director role, the first Pakistani woman that's in that role, and so you're kind of trailblazer. What are you doing now? What have you got to that? Where's that journey taken you?
The journey since that role. Since
Yeah.
that role, I set up Balanced in response to several things, really. Again, there's a layer of vulnerability here, but we had the highest head teacher vacancy rates in Leeds that we'd seen before, and as a city, we had and have the highest maintained schools of any local authority. And seeing post-COVID response to head teachers just not being able to make sense of the isolation, I suppose, being felt, and how much they had to pick up and do during that process meant that their role changed significantly overnight, and it became something they were never trained to do. And whilst there was a hell of a lot of support there, it just meant that there was this further, I suppose, isolation, which kind of is similar to what I'm describing from my childhood. And we know what it feels like when you're left alone and you're dealing with all of it, and you've got to really be the face of that. There's a heavy mental load and a physical load that you carry. And we had head teachers who were leaving probably near retirement age too, and deputies not wanting to step into those roles because they'd see the cost of leadership, and rightly so. And then at that time, Ruth Perry, and the unfortunate and tragic death for somebody who just wanted to do her job well.
Yeah.
And we've got to stop and step back and think, what is the cost of that? What is the cost? And how have we got to the position where our leaders are not supported in the human side of school leadership, in it being okay to be honest and open and learn with the job, not to have all those answers. And we've been saying this now for a number of years about leadership and the questions around not having to know it all, and developing a sense of experts around you, and not being a conduit of all knowledge, and not having to keep calm and carry on, so to speak. But there's still an expectation on leaders, particularly heads, still an expectation. And I think it's one of the hardest jobs to do. And I wanted to give back, because that was my legacy piece, leaving a city with 0 permanent exclusions, leaving a city on inclusion being the beating heart and soul of that city, and the entire city working together from maths to maintain schools. What do I give back, and what do I use from my experience? What do I know? Well, if the secondary school had been such that it had humanness at the heart of it, I probably wouldn't have been excluded. If there had been, or I would have been noticed in terms of what I was crying out for, because pain became, I probably would say, the only source of communication I had readily available to me. And I'm going back now, but that's what I say about children. If they're using pain, it's because that's the only source of communication they have. And what is that telling us? And we all say the same thing. And so I set Balanced up. I've been offering supervision purely for wellbeing to leaders, working on cultures in school, and looking at how we get the environment right for ourselves before we can get the right environment right for our children. So looking at it from a very, very different perspective. My entire career has been child focused, leadership focused. This has gone completely into other element. And I found myself isolated again, if I'm honest with you, because I'm probably one of the very few who offer supervision for leaders. And it's the least used resource. Coaching is used more than supervision, and yet in its entirety, it's offering a place for people to process that emotional load and complexity of their role without being coached into better goals, better outcomes, better leadership styles. It is a place to really be seen for what you are facing in reality, and regulating yourself and having your nervous system regulated, because we're all on a high nervous system anxiety loads without realizing we are. And I think that's the point of it, really.
Can I pause you just because I know that the coaching culture in schools has grown since sort of middle leadership training and NPQs where people were put on sort of coaching programs. Now, I just want to be clear what you mean by supervision. Now, I'll tell a story a little bit from my experience, but what you're making a distinction between coaching and supervision. We know that it exists in the health service. We know that it exists in mental health services, and it's used for great effect. The ambulance service staff need it. It's not something that's considered first port in teaching. So tell us what it is in terms of what is supervision for a leader in school? What does it look like?
Well, it's completely objective and it's completely independent. And when we look at some of the coaching models, they and also one-to-ones, which some people do say in MAPS, they are supervision. However, there's a line of accountability within those. So it's never really a full confidential space. It's a confidential space to be able to say what it is that you are finding challenging, what is keeping you awake at night, what the emotional toll and labour looks like for you. It's a place to say it warts and all, and a place to process the complexity of it. And supervision can be absolutely anything. It can be a leader talking about how staff are not following, or it could be some of their direction. It could be a member of staff who's saying, I want to whistleblow and I'm not sure the process, but I want to talk through it in terms of my mental load. It can be another leader who is thinking about resignation and they're not sure how to say it. All the complexities of the role, and it's not coaching necessarily through those decisions or saying we're doing a goal-orientated coaching. It's saying this is a safe and confidential space for you to regulate your nervous system. It's a space to listen primarily. It takes about around 15 minutes to start to regulate, then another 15 minutes, so on and so forth. By that full hour, if people are leaving lighter and have the chance to think for themselves independently of anybody else, then you achieved something quite remarkable. And in its simplicity, it is the most powerful thing. It's thinking aloud, being given permission to think aloud, and a place that can hold your emotional load. So it's a very, very safe container to say what you're not saying. That's what supervision is. It's who you're not saying it to and it's why you're not saying it. And automatically, staff start to reveal and open and understand, to have those moments of, I understand how I feel.
Yeah.
And that's driving some of my reactions and it's driving some of my understanding. It's also a place where you can look at some of the limiting beliefs. So it's not just all external, it can be internal too. And it's not a place where you need to be in distress to access it, nor do you need to be in a place where it's not mental health well-being supervision.
Yeah.
It's supervision to sustain leadership. Yeah. And that's for me, that's the key.
Yeah. And that is quite unique in the sense of what that's doing. And the reason I asked you that is that I'm chair of governors of a school. My head came to me and said, look, I've got a choice of a coaching program or this supervision. We can't afford it, but should we do it? And my response was, you should do it. Find the money. It's not massive. In fact, it's less than a day's cover. So why would we not do it? Because you're working in a challenging environment and you keep telling me all of these things that are going on. You need, I think if you're in leadership, you do need it. So, it's something that I encouraged my heads to get involved in and to do. And now they'll say, I don't know why we didn't do it before. So in terms of value, it is really valuable. So you've written a book. I'm going to hang on just 1 second. I'm going to put that on the screen. Here it comes up, the human side of school leadership, and there is a code there that we'll make sure is shared in the show notes. But the human side of leadership, is that where you've got to, Shaheen? That's what you've captured all of the things that you've just said. Is that what you're if they read the book, that's where they're going to find the tips and things where that will help them move forward? Tell us a little bit about where you got to that journey.
I think looking at everything, having sat in those roles and been in those roles, and then I keep coming back to it. I know the headship probably was the most challenging role and is the most challenging role in terms of my own experience, worked experience, and also my experience of supporting other heads. And I wanted something practical and pragmatic that really digs to the heart of it all, and not something that's asking people to go and do more of. But it's coming back essentially to what connection looks like for us. So when if I do coaching, or I'll do audit and I look at culture, I do my keynotes, I always talk about whether people are connected to you because you're the title, or they're connected to you because of who you are. Now we know happiness and satisfaction at work is related to connectedness, and that's the element of it that I hope people will take away really from the book. It's how pragmatically can we develop rates of connection. That means we don't need to go away and think about doing a wellbeing policy or additional policies that then just become those tick. We say this all the time, they become tick box. But actually the irony of doing more and more work in order to do less, it's a paradox, isn't it? It's not irony, it's a paradox. And so this is something that's quite pragmatic. It talks through how do we develop rates of connection with each other? How do we look at performance management delivered differently for the lens of connection? How do we have carefrontations rather than confrontations? It's all the aspects that I wish I had delivered to me on NPQs. It's the elements of it of, I know the leadership hat, I know the leadership styles, I know the diagnostics, I know this, but actually as a human-centered leader, for me, working in education, it's about people and children. And therefore, how do I expertly develop that a lot more? How do I draw into what I already have as a resource? And as a resource, human connectedness is there for every single person. It's just whether it's been tapped in or tapped out.
Yeah. And you talk about courage, care and connection and how that shapes school. And that's a really interesting point about, our leadership development programs are very focused on things that actually the leaders probably know something about anyway. The things that we're not training, I would say the core curriculum, we don't teach leaders the shape of a curriculum. We don't have any debate about that. And then what you're talking about is that human dimension of being a leader and making the difference in a school by those three things: the care, courage and connectivity. I'm just going to pause for a minute because I need to do the social media. We'll come back to that piece in a minute if I may, Shaheen. So thank you if you're here with us. Thank you for watching and sharing in this conversation. The comments are live this morning, so if you do have something to question or you want to say something, please do drop it into LinkedIn or YouTube. We are broadcasting on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify and Substack. Some of you will see this after it's live, and please do comment still and we'll come back to you and we'll respond. But please get involved in the conversation. It's really good to have you here, and thank you for joining us this morning. So Shaheen, give us, in terms of the work that you've been doing, so you've talked about courage, care and connection and how that human connectedness is important, and actually it would have made a massive difference in your journey, wouldn't it, if someone in that class had known that you were a carer? And I can remember that as a leader myself, working with young people, and when they said, I'm caring for parents, I'm caring for grandparents, it changes the conversation, and some of the things that we have in the system become less important when you understand that. So in your work, how's that made a difference, and particularly in Leeds? Getting to the point where zero exclusion. I know as a school we were working. I worked in one of the biggest schools in the south, in 2,800 children moving to 3,500 children, and we got to that point of zero exclusion, but it was hard work and we worked on all the systems. So give us some sort of feel of how that's worked for you. What happened? What were the significant markers of that, care, courage and connection? What did that look like in the schools?
I think I'm just going to step back and start really with the whole understanding of what the role was when I entered these. And I think being a system leader, coming from leadership into a local authority, when you have that understanding, that lived experience, that perspective, what you can then start to look at is where are our blind spots, and blind spots of I suppose real sort of division. If we're telling schools what to do, mandating policies, and actually it's working together, so schools will already have their own. As a city itself, it already lent itself to inclusion. Inclusion was incredibly strong. There was a system called Area Inclusion Partnerships where there was funding devolved, and it was the heads that managed that. So this wasn't a done-to process. It was where we're going to work together in conjunction with our inclusion policy and our education policy for Leeds, and look at what we mean as our drivers for real inclusion. Now, I can't say just in isolations what that looked like, but as an example, it was speaking to the DFE and saying, well, if you want to grow these MATs, their rates of suspension is quite high. If you're wanting to grow their case of staff leaving is quite high. And so drawing in all the conversations from all angles to say, we're a highly inclusive city. What does that look like from a perspective of growth and structures, policies? And the question I continuously and always ask is, who does this policy include and who does it exclude? And if we don't have the answer to that, we don't have the right people around the table. So the Area Inclusion Partnerships is where it was devolved. So a city had clusters where the head teachers were responsible for ensuring that inclusion was felt from a school perspective, a set of schools perspective, the child, the family, and the school community, as in the staff. And that was a system that had been developed and then was strengthened even further when I was at my time in Leeds. And it looked at the reality of what schools are facing. It looked at the reality of what a child is facing, what children are facing, and how do we create a system where they're not excluded, they're still on roll, they stay within in the system, and they're brought back in, as opposed to saying, we've forgotten about you, off you go. And what was interesting in terms of all of the process from a child identified as serious risk to the potential of permanent exclusion, what was that? And I looked at this system that had been going for years and years and years and years, and whose voice was missing in that entire system? The child's. And I think at that moment the reality struck that I can't believe we have still got a system going for years since my permanent exclusion that has excluded the voice of the child within this.
Yeah.
Whether that's pain or not, whether that is going to say what we don't want to hear or not, that's irrelevant. But to have that part missing from the process, it would give us a real understanding of what it feels like for that child. So therefore, to hear from them, it was just remiss of us, really. And so that was placed into the heart of that process as well. And 9 times out of 10, that would give people and leaders and the child a moment of recognition of how difficult it is. And what, I suppose, what the risks are. That if we carry down this process, what are those significant risks? So it was working with the city incredibly well through a very structured policy and a structure, and it held the staff and it held the child, and that's why it was so successful. Building relationships, it was key. That was the only way we, as a relational practice local authority, that was the only way we were going to achieve success. And so it was never a done to process. It was, we are the city, we are supporting our children. How do we do that? And yes, there's areas of competition. Yes, there's areas of I'd say ego, but I'd always say, and I think this comes back to what you stand for as a leader, I would always say better for, not better than. And you'd hear me as a parrot whenever there were conversations that were teetering towards, but we don't do that, but we're this, we're okay. And it was always, there are children, better for, not better than.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really powerful statement. Better for, not better than. It's not the comparative. It's making sure that that's true inclusivity, isn't it? That's the idea that every child matters. We're putting that particular agenda aside. Every child in the system does matter, and they deserve the best out of it. So you achieved your goal. I mean, I'm hearing, John Whitmore grow, goal, reality, opportunity, way forward. That's the practice. I'm hearing intentionality, in the sense of that's what it looks like. This isn't good enough. We can do better for, and the lived experience of children matters, and we shape that by all the things that we intentionally do. So now, in terms of what you're experiencing with leaders, what does that look like? I mean, I know you can't. I'm not asking you to give examples of people, because it's private, and that's right. It should stay confidential to them. But in terms of what you're hearing and what you're experiencing now, and I should say, in your journey, you're not just working in England now. You're working internationally. So there's some kind of typicality about this. The education profession is known to be that high pressure, high accountability. What are you seeing in terms of the comparison, and where's some good practice that you're seeing coming out? Where are there shoots of change? What are you experiencing in terms of what you're doing now?
Well, I'll start with the white paper, and it's sort of nod towards sustaining leadership, and I say a nod as opposed to something being set as a marker. And the nod was that 2,500 leaders will receive some sort of supervision and recognising. I mean, we have 25,000 leaders, so I'm going to say
that's 2,500. That's 10%.
So 2,500 leaders receiving some sort of supervision to sustain leadership. And I think now, for me, it's a real preface now. We really are at the point where we're looking at how we're drawing in AI to work smarter, to support curriculum development, teacher workload, flexibility, contractual HR. We're looking at an understanding of how we're going to use a system, an intelligence, to make life easier. But at that pinch point, how, when, and what, without a level of direction, is needed. And so I would say the job probably is harder. In my experience with leaders I'm working with now, the job feels harder because the role, the complexity, the level of hats having to be worn is far greater than it ever was before. And it's also far removed. So when you have heads describing that there are business managers, they're just business managers. You can see how for in that situation. And so I suppose it's looking structurally. We need to look at what does leadership and education look like now. We need to make informed choices so that our head teachers and our leaders and our CEOs know what the frame of reference is for their job. Now, before there is no frame of reference right now. No. So there's no frame of reference. We can't go on these old job descriptions that we keep churning out when we're looking to employ a CEO, a deputy head, a head teacher, and executive principal. They're not the same. And so if we were able, as a structure and a system within the UK, to look at what leadership looks like, given the facts that they are wearing, that they have many responsibilities, how, and that's why I suppose the MAT structure is there to take away some of those central processes from leaders. However, paradox, it's creating more, because you're always finding leaders in those meetings on HR, on health and safety, on governance, and so there is, and that's just to name a few. There's far more meetings. I've got new titles that are cropping up all the time. So for me, the leaders feeling that they are being pulled from pillar to post is a commonality that is not going away. It's actually getting worse. I have friends who have become new head teachers who I don't provide supervision or coaching for, but they are saying to me, look, I can't see myself beyond my second year of headship. I can't, it's untenable, it's unsustainable for me. And these are great people who are having a huge impact and are phenomenal leaders, human-centered leaders. And so I'm hearing that, but I'm also hearing that. So the pinch point is year 2, year 3 of leadership. We don't have a package of system of support around that to sustain it, but we can sustain leaders. Yes, we can hold them up. Yes. And we can look at the metrics around what will make them successful. But unless we look at this as a reform to the system and what actually is leadership, I don't think we're going to quite cut it. We're just going to put sticking plasters over. Yeah. So it's a structural reform, really, like we do when we look at the curriculum, and when we reform the curriculum, and we reform exam processes, so on and so forth, and Ofsted to a certain extent. So it's just looking at what is leadership in the 21st century, what is leadership in the world of AI, what is leadership leadership with the growth of maths, what does leadership look like, and what levels of leadership do we actually need? And I think we haven't really had those conversations, so we're very behind in the times, I would say. Corporately, those conversations go on, but in the public service, we still have the same style of leadership that we had 100 years ago.
Yeah. That's a point well made, Shane. I mean, certainly in the MAT environment, when you look at multi-academy trusts, so what is a CEO? What is the CFO, COO? Those, what are they? What's the scope of their responsibility, and how does that impact the head of a school? And has it really changed that, or has it just made a group of leaders who don't necessarily know the scope of their role, or how they operate is very, very different in different organizations, isn't it? That's and I hear lots of the we don't want to be a Tesco's MAT, so we need to give autonomy and responsibility to the leaders. Well, actually, what does that take away from them? They're just still the same head teacher that they ever were, and it's not actually given them anything that they and as you say, it's an untenable position in terms of the scope of what they're being asked to do. It's a big issue, isn't it? It's not going to change quickly, and that kind of intentionality is hard to find, and it takes special leaders to do that. The thing I've found over the career is that when you find those special people, they do a job and they work within their domain, but it doesn't affect the system. And so, speaking to the system is really, that's what we're trying to do in the sense of these conversations, is to raise the game. And if you're out there listening, please, hear this. We want to improve the system. We want it to be better for the learners that we're caring for. They deserve better. So, in terms of what can people do now, if I find myself in headship again, or I won't. That's I've done my time. What would you say is the first kind of thing? So someone's out there, someone's one of these people, they're in their second year of headship. They want to keep it going. They want to be doing it because they've got that high moral purpose. What are the key things that you would say so that, the care and connection that you've talked about, and takes a bit of courage as well. So, so I'm going to need to be looking at what am I prepared to do? What are the key markers that you would say people need to be kind of prioritizing? Where would I start if I'm there? What are the things that you would say, get round this, lay the other things aside, get round this first?
I think it's definitely prioritization, but I don't think that we have that in early leadership when we believe and think and rightly so to some extent that we have to do all of these things. And we go into leadership, don't we, without that experience, that wisdom yet to say we can look at what we can't do, look at what we can do, and strengthen our feeling together. I think developing your tribe, and what I mean by that is looking at your network of support. And so for new heads, having other new heads to speak to bounce ideas off, to pick the phone up and say, look, I've got this. Is there anyone that can support or help? And that, I know, is a really powerful sort of network of support for new head teachers, because there isn't a system of local authority support to new heads. There is something that is sort of, I would say, superficial. It's coming back to how do you want to lead your staff, but what do you want them to know about you? I often say to CEO when I do my keynote, it's a CEO, it's not a chief executive officer, but a chief engagement officer. You're engaging all the time. You're a connecting engagement officer. So you're that as well as a head teacher. How are you engaging your staff, community, and your children, as well as engaging yourself? But if you have your network of support around you, where you're able to offload to, you are ready and available to a certain extent, obviously understanding the reality of the role to a certain extent, to be able to do that for your staff. So it's starting with it's coming back, and we say this all the time, to the why. I looked at I'm on two boards, and I think questions that I keep coming back to is, this is taking us away from our why. This is taking us away from our why. Come back to the why. Keep coming back to the why. And it's exhausting, These are exhausting roles, physically demanding, mentally demanding, emotionally demanding, and yet have many, many opportunities. I'm hosting a Human Side of School Leadership conference, and one of my keynotes that I have on there for a serving head teacher to deliver is why I still love the job. So whilst it is demanding and heavy and all-consuming, what aspects of it do we still absolutely love? Because we desperately need great head teachers, and we need to keep them within the workforce. So somebody who is struggling is, don't feel you're a lone island. That's probably the one piece of advice. You're not a lone island. You can't be a lone island. Not alone. There are so many heads 10 years, 15 years into it who are still facing the same problems that you're facing in year 1 or year 2. Still the same. Parental complaints are the one that is draining people and staff and leaders. And I suppose it's that understanding of, I'm trying to do a great job, I'm trying to lead the school, I'm trying to lead the community, I'm doing a great job with the children, and yet still it's not good enough. And then when you get that from parents, and some parents, are very forthcoming in their praise and their support, and that's great, and many are not. And then when you're also getting that from a new accountability system and structure, which says inadvertently, like exclusions do, you're not good enough, you need to do better. You cannot sustain that treadmill of improvement all the time. There is no rest. And so in that, we're not allowing our leaders to rest in the role to make significant impact as a leader for themselves and also for others. Yeah.
And that's, you speak of the breadth of things. I mean, I know, when I had, fairly large teams, I talked, the schools that I was involved in were big. That ability to say to yourself, I don't need to be master of all of this. I just need to know what's going on. And so reporting and having lines of reporting and not feeling that they have to do it my way. I used to say to them, there are lots of ways to skin a cat. I like cats, but that's just an expression. I don't have to tell you all of the detail, let you do it. It needs to work. So tell me it's working and show me it's working, but I'm going to let you do it and get that. That's a capacity don't see in a high control, high stakes, high accountability system. It's all systems need to be tight, and you need to do it the way I'm telling you because we want consistency and all of those things. It's kind of the antithesis of what we're saying. What leadership is not having a handle on, or not you having a handle, yes, but not controlling everything. And that characteristic needs to come out. We need to talk about it and we need to shape it, don't we? I'm hearing what you're saying, Shaheen, and I'm kind of recognizing all of that in my own leadership and in what I see. And it's so, so many heads just say, I've done 4 years, I've done 3 years, I can't keep doing this. I can't, and they stop and go and fill shelves in Tesco's. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's
more the conversations, Chris. That there are more the conversations I am seeing, are the conversations I can't. And it's not because I don't want to. So we need to really get that right. It's not because I don't want to, because I do.
They do, yes.
Given so much of themselves, but if they're not supported to sustain it, and there's no recognition on the difficulties and realities of it, then yes, they do want to leave the profession. And I think that's the element I'm discussing here today. So how can we look at this as system structures, national education policy, to look at leadership, just leadership for now, and what it will look like. And so we really need someone to hold it. And I suppose the criticism comes and arises, who do we have within those systems that understands the roles because they've been through those roles. And so when I talked about my first few months within Leeds, is I've come from the system. So therefore, I'm not prospectively blind. And prospective blindness, that's the element sometimes where you lose sight of asking people to do. And that's where as a profession, we have this healthy amount of cynicism when we're receiving the 9 o'clock DFE email drop, or we're receiving it at 4 o'clock on a Friday, asking us to look at changing. And I suppose a changing goalposts is another complaint, because how many leaders and at what time and scope of how long they need in order to implement any policy. Now we know we've got significant policy change in the next, this coming September, next academic year too. That's huge. That's a huge ask. So I suppose it's how do we recognise what we're asking our leaders to do, and how do we place support within that recognition, so we're not asking our leaders to do more with less.
Yeah, and that's I just personally recently, so we've had a curriculum review in England. There are curriculum reviews going on in Wales and Northern Ireland, and we know Scotland. I've been involved in some of those conversations, particularly focused on curriculum assessment. It's really interesting seeing the people that they've got involved in the conversation, even just what you've just said, that the conversation about, well, what is our intent? What are the lines that we're going to keep to? I was listening to Professor Tim Oates talking about the Northern Ireland assessment review, and basically he was saying, if it takes too long, we're not doing it. So the tests, they're not high stakes, high accountability. They will be diagnostic, and they're in the classroom. And so some of those lines that he was very clearly setting out, you could hear the leaders kind of sighing with, I'm not going to have to send reams of data, and they're not going to be used against it. But just I'd really, really take that kind of image that you've described of, here is our line, let's not deviate from it. What's the line? So reducing workload, reducing the administrative burden on people to do the job, be creative, be innovative, do the things that you're feeling that are going to be and proving that are being successful, read the research. Actually, that's why Friday Focus is called Friday Focus, because I work with so many leaders that say Friday morning is my time to stop and think, and that's why we did it. So that's part of the essence of what this is about. But Sheena, I'm really impressed with that kind of shaping, and I hope if you're listening, take that on board, those things that Shaheen has said, and get the book and read it, because there are things that you could just easily do that would make such a difference. We can't change the accountability system, we can't change the pressure, but we can change it if we respond differently. That's the truth. Does that, Shaheen, you're moving, but
courage. Yeah, it's the courage to say, this is a school I lead. This is a school that I lead, and I'm leading it exceptionally well. And whilst the measures that you may feel are not exceptional, I am doing an incredibly great job. And as leaders, we don't have those frames to be able to push back slightly, to be able to challenge slightly from a place of saying, because the treadmill is improvement on a constant basis, we haven't been able to stop and step back and say, look, I'm doing a great job. And something I used to ask is, can this school do any more given the circumstances it is in? And the answer is no, they can't do any more than given the circumstances it is in. Then they are doing a hell of a good job. We need a system that recognises that. Job satisfaction, I think the number one correlator of that is, do you know you're making a difference? When we're on at interview, we always talk about making a difference at interview. And then that seems to leave, that phraseology seems to leave when we go into the role. But actually, that is the number one correlator of job satisfaction is, are we communicating with ourselves and with others that we actually are making a difference?
Yeah.
And we are, because education is running on the goodwill of these amazing leaders, staff, children, communities. It's running on the goodwill. It's not running on a great system and structure we have in the UK. It's running on pure goodwill. Because if we were to stop the goodwill, we'd have a halt to education. So we've got to recognise that people are doing an incredible job in challenging circumstances, wanting to do that, the continuation of that. But what we have to do as policymakers, as policy influencers, is to say that should not cost a leader this. What cost is it to everybody? And so we've got to look at that. And that's what I'm saying, a leadership reform mechanisms. And I love the fact that he said, if it's too long, we're not doing it. We need leaders with that courage to say, that's not going to work. We need the leaders to ask those cynical questions. We need the leaders to do that. These are the cynical questions, the ira and the sighing. Well, they're normal. They're normal expressions for being in a system where you think, God, again, really, we're doing this again. We're looking at this again, and now you're asking me to. And so there's that. And I think really the department could look at their levels of connection and care and look at that inwardly before they face outwards to schools and staff. And I think then, and we do get letters, and staff and children and schools do get letters say, you know, thank you, you've done exceptionally well. I think we need more than that. We need a reality check. And let me that, a reality check.
That sense of the paying it forward, you know, I know, you know, when you sat at the desk and there's, you know, you've got this pile of things, when that one little card comes in from a child or a parent that says, thank you, my child is now doing this, that, the other, you know, they've achieved their goal, or it's made such a difference to us as a family, that kind of makes the job worthwhile. It does. And I remember very clearly, I've probably still got on my desk some of those that, you know, the notable ones. I don't keep the ones that were that wasn't good enough, and I wanted this, that, and the other. But that's the reality. We are dealing with stakeholders who have different expectations, and some of them are very different, and you have to handle them. And I always found that, you know, standing positively and saying, well, this is why we're doing what we're doing, and this is it. Generally, that they just needed to hear that. They just needed to hear that part. So being positive is great. Shaheen, I'm just going to pause for a second again, if I may, and then we'll come to the last question, if that's all right. So thank you for being here, and thank you for getting involved in the conversation. Those that are posting, really appreciate it. If you've got questions, do put them on the LinkedIn and YouTube. As we've been talking, and I've got the slide at the bottom is talking about Shaheen Meyer's book, The Human Side of Leadership, School Leadership. Please do use the link there and get your copy. I am going to just refer to some, you know, within the Work of Smart Curriculum, there are 2 books that are now available, The Perfect Timetable and The Efficient School, all part of the Smart Curriculum Method series. The 4 books will be done by the end of next year. So the 2 that are out now, The Perfect Timetable is available. The Efficient School will be out on August the 13th, and we've got some events coming up where you can get involved in that. So and then the following 2, The Impactful Timetable and The Leader's Perspective, will follow, all focused on curriculum design. Please do get a copy. And actually, a lot of what we're talking about are captured in the book in terms of the leadership questions, and that will be not that it should be the last one, but that's the one that will come during next year. So please get involved in the conversation again and find your copy of the book. They're all available on the website, so go to smartcurriculum.net, please. Okay, Shaheen, this the difficult question that I ask at the end of this conversation is, if there was one thing that you could change, what would it be? Now, we've referred to a whole lot of things, but where would you go first? In terms of, if you were capturing the priority, what's the priority you think in terms of the system, school leaders themselves?
I would say that I'd love for there to be a mandate for leaders to be supported in their role, so that they stay in those roles, sustain their roles. And if we help our staff to feel better, they'll do better and they'll see better. And if they see better, maybe the rates of exclusions and suspensions will draw down slightly. And that's not a criticism, but we have got to support our system to support. So taking care of our hearts and minds, I'd say, to take care of the young hearts and minds. They're not separate. They're interlinked. And that doesn't mean that we hold more at the cost of protection to ourselves and protection for our staff. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is, if we are able to sustain leadership because it's mandated and there is a realism of what it looks like in this day and age, then we'll see inclusion that is not an add-on word, or inclusion that is not drawn out to us from an accountability system that values it, yet penalises us for including the very children and families and staff that we need to hold the place and hold us. And I suppose that's just that, to mandate a support system for leaders. And that doesn't mean they're not doing a good enough job. It means it's because they're doing a good enough job. Yeah. And it's all about high value, highly trained people that have got the moral purpose to do the job. We need to value them in a way that would sustain them to do it well and do it continually and keep going with it. at no cost to themselves, and that's I think it's not costing them their health, it's not costing them their motivation, it's not costing them their purpose and their joy. We should be able to have joy in our work. And it's incredibly difficult sometimes to see the wood for the trees when you're just inundated. You're inundated with complaints, you're inundated with some hardships, and it's in a constant. And we need to look at that. Are we depleting our workforce, or are we supporting them? Are we fulfilling them, and are we enabling them? And I suppose that's the question really that I think we should ask. Therefore, mandating a policy, that means we've got a different structure of support for our leaders.
Yeah. I mean, that's there's just something hit me as you were saying that the idea that, you know, we know that what's going to improve in the classroom, if we're going to raise standards, is quality first teaching. So we've got high quality teaching, peers watching peers. And the question I ask often when we look at, as you started with that question about groupings and population design, is how do weak learners ever see better learning if we put them in groups where there are only weak learners around them? So there's that whole thing of quality first. But then we need to apply that to the people that are leading it too. So, you know, if we had these systems in place, if we did what you've just described, and we valued the people and we invested them in the way, and we really take it seriously, then it wouldn't be about a rigid, hard-nosed kind of accountability. It would be, well, you're brilliant and you're doing wonderfully. What else could we do? That there's a kind of a culture change, isn't there, in that process? And that's what you're advocating.
It's this. I think it's shifting from a culture of you're to blame to let's support.
Yes.
It's shifting it from a deficit. This is what you're not doing well. To you're doing these things great. We're going to continue to do that. And we're going to continue to support you with that.
Yeah.
And because the hard conversations are easier to have when you've got good reserves in you that make you feel that you're doing an incredible job. Yeah. It's when you're not feeling that you're doing an incredible job, that reserves are incredibly low and you can't have those hard conversations or hear the hard conversations being had with you. This doesn't mean remove accountability. No, this means looking at accountability in a way which will be supportive and will develop. And again, the same conversations. We've been having these same conversations now for decades.
Yes.
It hasn't changed.
Yeah. And they will be the first ones to say, do what you've always done, get what you've always got. That's the kind of so as educators and as a system, I just to hear all those things that we've said, you know, the 10-year cycle in education, well, we're doing the same thing we did 10 years ago, all that innovation. We've got some really interesting speakers coming on over the summer, you know, Ger Grouse talking about the EAZs and how that journey we haven't seen systemic improvement in the areas where we invested all that money. Why? Because we haven't actually changed our thinking. We're just we think throwing money at it is the answer. There's so many things to talk through and to really get our heads around. I think, you know, Shaheen, your engagement at the highest level in the system gives you an experience that is able to speak back to that system, and we're grateful that you do, and thank you for your book. And if you haven't already cottoned on, get a copy of the human side of school leadership. The link to Amazon is there. We will put that on the show notes. I've got it on my screen here, nice light blue color book with some hearts on the front of it. So it's about the heart. I can't put it on the screen, but we will make sure that the show notes are there so that you can get a copy. Shaheen, thank you for the conversation this morning. There's so many other things that we could have talked about, but I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you. And it was a real pleasure. Take care. And I'll just stay with me for a moment, and I'm just going to finish the show, if that's okay. So thank you for being here. We appreciate this conversation, really important conversation. So all the things that Shaheen has talked about in terms of managing ourselves, our leadership, and looking at the human. Well, it's a human business. We're about educating young people and young lives, preparing them for their futures. So thank you to Shaheen for the conversation. We've got plenty more, as I've just said. We've got lots of guests coming up, some really interesting perspectives and things to input into the conversation. Please stay involved in the conversation, and we'll see you again very soon. Thank you. Take care. Speak soon.